What's shaking, gang? Mr. Jeff here, and today I wanted to talk to you guys about mastering, and at what point you might want to consider shelling out the money to have your tracks professionally mastered. And just so we're clear, when I'm talking about professional mastering, I'm talking about like sending your tracks to, say, Abbey Road Studios to have them mastered. Not some random person on the internet who's going to master your album for $10. And just before we get into it, just the first thing I want to touch on quickly is what exactly mastering is, just in case some of you don't know. So in a nutshell, mastering is this. You've recorded all your songs for an album or an EP, they're all mixed, you've exported the stereo files, and then those files would be sent to the mastering engineer. He or she would then take those tracks and apply any final EQ, compression, and bring the levels of the tracks up. The end goal is essentially to have all the tracks on the album sound cohesive together. That's why when you listen to an album, the volume level from song to song is consistent. The EQ from song to song is pretty consistent. They don't sound wildly different from song to song. Now obviously there's more to mastering than that, but that's pretty well it in a nutshell. So now let's get into why you shouldn't pay for mastering. Alright, so when shouldn't you pay for mastering? And again, these are just my thoughts on it, just putting it out as something for you to consider. Now you have to consider your reach as a band or a musician. Now I'm just using Abbey Road Studios as an example, not sponsored or anything, but if you were to send your tracks there to get mastered, with the current exchange rate US dollars, you're looking at about $125 a song. Times that by 10 or 12 or 15 songs, you get expensive pretty quick. So if you're going to put out this album to give it to a few friends and your grandma and it's going to get 12 plays on Spotify, shelling out $1,000 or $2,000 to have your album mastered probably isn't worth it. If you have a very small audience, then at this point, that's $1,000 or $2,000 that might be better served somewhere else. So to boil that one down, essentially, if you're not going to be able to recoup that money you spend on mastering, you're probably not at the point where you need it yet. At least on a professional level. I mean, you still gotta have your songs mastered, whether you do them yourself or, again, pay a random dude on $5 or $20. So now let's dive into when you should pay to have your tracks professionally mastered. Alright, so when should you start to consider paying for mastering? Now, as with everything, there's going to be a million different variables to consider and everyone's situation is going to be different. But for starters, let's say it costs you $2,000 to have your album mastered. If you know that you can recoup that money without a problem, even if you just break even, then at that point you might as well. But on the flip side of that, there might be situations where you're not going to make that money back, but it's still going to make sense to shell out to have your songs mastered. Now, as an example, let's say you're putting out a 3 to 4 song demo, you're trying to shop around to labels and such. Now, are you going to recoup that $400 to $500? Well, probably not. But if somebody at that label or anywhere else you're sending your demo actually happens to listen to it, it's going to help it stand out because it's going to have that final polish and sheen and professional sound to it. And that can only be a good thing. Another area might be, say you're starting to blow up on Spotify. Now, I get that on most of these streaming services, you need like 37 trillion streams to make a nickel. But I mean, if your music's starting to get 10 or hundreds of thousands or even into the millions of plays, you've got a sizable audience. You're growing as a band or a musician. And if you're getting that many plays, you probably have a website. You probably have people buying your merch and things like that. So you're making money anyway, even if it's not from Spotify. So if you're doing that well, on your next release, it would probably make sense to strongly consider shelling out to have your album professionally mastered. So those are my thoughts on when you should start to consider to have your music professionally mastered. Hopefully you found it helpful and gave you something to consider or think about. And on that note, I've been Mr. Jeff. I just want to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.